From being trapped in the Arctic for years and forced to live on nothing but the Inuit's traditional diet, to proving that everything modern nutritionists taught us was wrong, Valdemar Stefansson's discoveries would turn the entire world of nutrition on its head. In this video, we'll dive into what Stefansson uncovered during his years living with the Inuit and why the modern diseases that dominate our world today were almost completely non-existent in the Inuit. Valdemar Stefansson was born in Manitoba, Canada in 1879. Although his family had a background in farming, Stefansson was much more interested in understanding how certain people lived, adapted, and survived in extreme climates. He went on to study at the University of North Dakota and the University of Iowa, eventually earning a scholarship at Harvard University, where he began his postgraduate studies in anthropology and archaeology. But this led him to discover something even greater when he joined his first Arctic expedition in 1906. Instead of just studying these populations through books, he would now have the chance to truly understand their lifestyles and how they survived in such harsh environments. Because of this, he became convinced he not only had to observe their ways of doing things, but also fully experience it himself. His core philosophy of completely immersing himself in the experience of how these populations lived would be what really set him apart as an explorer and would lead to discoveries that would come to shock the world of modern science. This eventually led to his most important expedition ever in 1913. But it did not all go as planned when his ship became trapped in the sea of ice. Cut off from civilization and surrounded by endless amounts of ice-covered ocean, Stefansson and his remaining team were forced to rely entirely on the Inuit way of life, eating mostly caribou, seal, and whale blubber. But what was originally meant to just be a desperate attempt to stay alive turned into something far more remarkable. In his 1960s book, The Fat of the Land, he explains that it's not just the Eskimos that thrive on an all-meat diet. He wrote, "The nutritionists had been perfectly right when they explained to me that the Eskimos can assimilate an all-meat diet perfectly because they have been conditioned to it. They were wrong in claiming that such conditioning takes centuries. It actually takes about 5 days." Living among the Inuits was like stepping into a completely different world, one built for survival and nothing else. There were no restaurants, markets, TV, or any form of modern-day comforts. Every meal had to be earned and was the complete opposite of overly complicated diets Stefansson knew back home. But it wasn't just the modern-day comforts that were missing. Stefansson noted something else that was absent that was taking over modern societies: disease. Although the Inuits' diets had little to no vegetable matter, he noticed that none of them showed any signs of scurvy, heart disease, cancer, or obesity. It was just completely non-existent there. Because of this, he realized that nutritionists back home had got it all wrong. Not only did they not need to avoid meat, but the Inuits prioritized fat, which made up roughly 80 to 85% of their calories. After all, our bodies function far differently when in a low-carb or no-carb state. For example, the recommended daily allowance for vitamin C for men is about 95 milligrams. But on the carnivore diet, in the absence of carbohydrates, the requirements for vitamin C are in nanograms. This is because the molecules of both carbohydrates and vitamin C compete for many of these same transporters into the cell. Because of this, without carbohydrates, our bodies are much more efficient at utilizing vitamin C. But when Stefansson was eventually rescued and came home, many were skeptical. They thought his claims may have just been exaggerated or simply impossible. So, to prove them wrong, Stefansson put his own health on the line, along with another Arctic explorer, Karsten Andersen. In 1928, the two men checked into the Bellevue Hospital in New York City, agreeing to live under full medical supervision for an entire year. Every meal was prepared, weighed, and monitored by a team of doctors who were certain that they were about to watch them fail. No fruits, no vegetables, no supplements, just meat and fat. By the end of the experiment, the results were undeniable. Both men were in excellent health. They showed no signs of deficiency in any vitamin or mineral, no issues with digestion, and no decline in strength or energy. Even after an entire year without a single piece of fruit, vegetable, or fiber, there was no scurvy, no constipation, and no fatigue. In fact, the doctors that were overseeing them admitted that they were healthier at the end of the study than when they began. The diet that was supposed to destroy them had done the exact opposite. Now, to many mainstream nutritionists, this would be very concerning. After all, they would likely claim that LDL is actually causal in heart disease. The thing is, a lot of this work was done by people with a conflict of interest, meaning the results they reported to find would have had a significant impact on how much money they would make. But this was thoroughly debunked in this review, showing that LDL does not cause heart disease. And as for fiber, it's no surprise that their digestion remained flawless without it. In fact, a clinical study published in 2012 found that removing dietary fiber completely resolved constipation and improved bowel function in almost every single participant. Those who eliminated fiber entirely had less bloating, less discomfort, and more regular bowel movements than those who continued eating it. Today, over 100 years later, modern science is finally catching up to what Stephenson witnessed firsthand. Stable isotope studies have even shown that ancient human diets were remarkably similar to the Inuits, which were high in fat and protein and nearly void of all carbohydrates. And when researchers looked at the Inuit gut microbiome, they found the same thing Stephenson described: an entire system adapted to thrive on fat instead of fiber or carbs. Even the diseases Stephenson never saw among the Inuit are now showing up after Western foods entered their communities. In a study on Alaskan Inuit, researchers found that once carbohydrates and processed foods replaced their traditional diet, rates of diabetes, heart disease, and cancer skyrocketed. In other words, the Inuit stopped eating their native diet, the diet Stephenson had lived on. They began getting the same diseases the rest of the modern world suffers from. But even without modern science, the core logic and principles that resulted in the Inuits thriving are still there. So while modern science is only now beginning to understand what Stephenson witnessed over a century ago, the truth is, this should have always been obvious. It comes down to the first principles: to be consistent with what's evolutionarily congruent. If humans spent millions of years eating and adapting to a certain way of life, then isn't it likely that everything about our biology and physiology is perfectly in line for that? But we act like we know it all, like we've somehow outsmarted nature itself. Yet there's far more that we don't know, and even more that we don't know that we don't know. This is why I believe that logic and reasoning should always come before the science, because science and data can be manipulated to prove almost anything. It's a supporting pillar, not the foundation. If the foundation isn't built on sound reasoning, the pillars don't even matter. And this is why I personally prioritize beef. For most of our evolution, we've obtained most of our fuel from large ruminant animals. And sure, we could go into detail about all the essential vitamins and minerals in meat, and the fact that there are nutrients in meat that we must have that we can't get from plants, and that there are no nutrients in plants that we must have that we can't get from meat. Or maybe the avoidance of anti-nutrients contained within plants that block vitamin and mineral absorption, or the fact that our bodies seem to be perfectly in tune with a low-carb or ketogenic state. But those are only the things that we know of. What about all the other mechanisms or chain or cross reactions in our bodies that we don't even know are happening? This is why I think it's so important to eat something as close as you can to what you think the proper human diet is. To me, this is mostly fatty meat from large ruminant animals, and this is just one of the main core principles that I follow. If you want the other 6, grab the guide for free in the description below.